vote yes. He will vote yes on ordering the previous question. Madam Speaker, as a member designated by Mr. Richmond of Louisiana, pursuant to H-Res 8, I inform the House that Mr. Richmond will vote yes. He will vote yes on ordering the previous question. And I will too.
Still working on it. Probably continue to. I don't think so, because it's the people that are probably not getting speaking time.
I got it. They're still talking. I got you. Does the gentleman from Tennessee rise?
Madam Speaker, as the member designated by Mr. Fleischman of Tennessee, pursuant to H-Res 8, I inform the House that Mr. Fleischman will vote no on the Representative Scanlon motion to move the previous question on House Res 38. Thank you. And Madam Speaker, as the member designated by Mr. Desjardins of Tennessee, pursuant to H-Res 8, I inform the House that Mr. Desjardins will vote nay on the Representative Scanlon motion to move the previous question on H-Res 38.
For what purposes does the gentlewoman from Massachusetts rise?
As the member designated by Ms. Frankel pursuant to H-Res 8, I inform the House that Ms. Frankel will vote yes on ordering the previous question. And as the member designated by Ms. Bonamici pursuant to H-Res 8, I inform the House that Ms. Bonamici will vote yes on ordering the previous question.
Does the gentleman from Texas rise?
Madam Speaker, as the member designated by Mr. Fallon, Texas, pursuant to House Resolution 8, I inform the House that Mr. Fallon will vote nay on the Rep. Scallion's motion to move the previous question on House Resolution 38.
Indiana rise.
As a member designated by Mr. Baird of Indiana, pursuant to H-Res 8.1, inform the House that Mr. Baird will vote no on the Rep. Scanlon motion to move the previous question, H-Res 38.
New York rise.
As the member designated by Chairman Jerry Nadler pursuant to H-Res 8, I inform the House that Chairman Nadler will vote yea on ordering the previous question. As the member designated by Congressman Brendan Boyle pursuant to H-Res 8, I inform the House that Congressman Boyle will vote yea on the previous question. As the member designated by Chairwoman Eddie Bernice Johnson pursuant to H-Res 8, I inform the House that Chairwoman Johnson will vote yea on the previous question.
Who is this? Does the gentleman from Kansas rise?
Madam Speaker, as the member designated by Mr. LaTurner, Kansas, pursuant to House Resolution 8, I inform the House that Mr. LaTurner will vote no on the Representative Scanlon motion to move the previous question on House Resolution 38.
Thank you.
Madam Speaker, as the member designated by Ms. Eshoo, pursuant to H-Res 8, I inform the House that Ms. Eshoo will vote yes on ordering the previous question.
The gentleman from Connecticut rise.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, as the member designated by Mr. Adam Smith of Washington State pursuant to House Resolution 8, I inform the House that Mr. Smith will vote yes on ordering the previous question. Yep.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Maryland rise?
Madam Speaker, as the member designated by Ms. Alma Adams pursuant to House Resolution 8, I inform the House that Ms. Adams will vote yes on ordering the previous question.
The gentleman from Indiana rise.
Madam Speaker, as the member designated by Ms. Walorski pursuant to H-Res 8, I inform the House that Ms. Walorski will vote nay on the motion to move the previous question on H-Res 38.
What purpose does the gentleman from California rise?
As the member designated by Mr. Vella pursuant to H-Res 8, I inform the House that Mr. Vella will vote aye on ordering the previous question.
For what purposes does the gentlewoman from California rise?
As a member designated by Mr. Desaulniers pursuant to H-Res 8, I inform the House that Mr. Desaulniers will vote yes on ordering the previous question.
Does the gentlewoman from Maine rise?
As the member designated by Ms. Custer, pursuant to H-Res 8, I inform the House that Ms. Custer will vote yes on ordering the previous question.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Pennsylvania rise? For what purpose does the gentleman from Pennsylvania rise?
Madam Speaker, as a member designated by Mr. Lawson of Florida, 5th District, Congressional District, pursuant to House Resolution 8, I inform that Mr. Lawson will vote yea.
Does the gentleman from Texas rise?
Madam Speaker, as the member designated by Representative Fletcher, pursuant to H-Res 8, I inform the House that Ms. Fletcher will vote aye on ordering the previous question.
Not ready. For what purpose from Kansas rise?
Madam Speaker, as the member designated by Ms. Lager-Fernandez, pursuant to H-Res 8, I inform the House that Ms. Lager-Fernandez will vote aye on ordering the previous question.
For what purposes does the gentleman from Illinois rise?
Madam Speaker, as the member designated by Mr. Grijalva, pursuant to H-Res 8, I inform the House that Mr. Grijalva will be voting yea on ordering the previous question. And as the member designated by Ms. Presley, pursuant to H-Res 8, I inform the House that Ms. Presley will vote yea on ordering the previous question.
Does the gentleman from Virginia rise?
Designated by Mr. Blumenauer, pursuant to H-Res 8, inform the House that Mr. Blumenauer will vote yes on ordering the previous question. As the member designated by Mr. Lowenthal, pursuant to H-Res 8, I inform the House that Mr. Lowenthal will vote yes on ordering the previous question. As the member designated by Mr. Peters, pursuant to H-Res 8, I inform the House that Mr. Peters will vote yes on ordering the previous question. As the member designated by Mr. Liu, pursuant to H-Res 8, I inform the House that Mr. Liu will vote yes on ordering the previous question.
Does the gentlewoman from New York rise?
Madam Speaker, as the member designated by Mr. Young of Alaska, pursuant to House Resolution 8, I inform the House that Mr. Young will vote nay on the motion to move the previous question on House Resolution 21.
Does the gentlewoman from Connecticut rise?
As the member designated by Ms. Wilson, pursuant to H-Res 965, I inform the House that Ms. Wilson will vote yes on ordering the previous question.
For what purposes does the gentleman from Massachusetts rise?
As the member designated by Mr. Moulton of Massachusetts pursuant to H-Res 8, I will inform the House that Mr. Moulton will vote yes on ordering the previous question.
Purposes of the gentleman from New Jersey rise.
Madam Speaker, as the member designated by Ms. Bonnie Watson Coleman pursuant to H-Res 8, I inform the House that Ms. Watson Coleman will vote yes on ordering the previous question. And as the member designated by Mr. Albio Series pursuant to H-Res 8, I inform the House that Mr. Series will vote yes on ordering the previous question. And as the member designated by Mr. Bill Pascrell pursuant to H-Res 8, I inform the House that Mr. Pascrell will vote yes on ordering the previous question. And finally, Madam Speaker, as the member designated by Mr. Paul Tonko pursuant to H-Res 8, I inform the House that Mr. Tonko will vote yes on ordering the previous question.
For what purposes does the gentleman from California rise?
Madam Speaker, as member designated by Congressmember Napolitano pursuant to House Resolution 8, I inform the House that Congressmember Napolitano will vote yes on ordering the previous question. And Madam Speaker, as member designated by Congressmember Costa pursuant to House Resolution 8, I inform the House that Congressmember Costa will also vote yes on the previous question.
Does the gentlewoman from Virginia rise? For what purposes does the gentlewoman from Virginia rise? This is not
Speaker,
Virginia.
as the member designated by Ms. Porter pursuant to House Resolution 8, I inform the House that Ms. Porter will vote yes on ordering the previous question. And as the member designated by Mr. McEachin pursuant to House Resolution 8, I inform the House that Mr. McEachin will vote yes on ordering the previous question.
Purposes does the gentlewoman from Michigan rise?
As the member designated by Mrs. Dingell pursuant to House Resolution 8, I inform the House that Mrs. Dingell votes yea on the previous question. As the member designated by Ms. Agsney pursuant to House Resolution 8, I inform the House that Ms. Agsney votes yea on the previous question. As the member designated by Ms. Lee of Nevada pursuant to House Resolution 8, I inform the House that Ms. Lee votes yea on the previous question. As the member designated by Ms. Capter pursuant to House Resolution 8, I inform the House that Ms. Capter votes yea on the previous question.
Gentleman from Michigan rise?
Madam Speaker, as the member designated by Mr. Bergman pursuant to House Resolution 8, I inform the House that Mr. Bergman will vote no on ordering the previous question. As the member designated by Mr. Lambourne pursuant to House Resolution 8, I inform the House that Mr. Lambourne will vote no on ordering the previous question.
What purposes does the gentlewoman from Florida rise?
Madam Speaker, as the member designated by Mr. Payne of New Jersey pursuant to HRES pursuant to HRES 8, I inform the House that Mr. Payne will vote yea on ordering the previous question. And Madam Speaker, as the member designated by Mr. Hastings of Florida pursuant to HRES 8, I inform the House that Mr. Hastings will also vote yea on ordering the previous question.
Does the gentleman from Virginia rise? For what purposes does the gentleman from Virginia rise?
Madam Speaker, as the member designated by Ms. Titus of Nevada pursuant to HRES 8, I inform the House that Ms. Titus will vote yes on ordering the previous question.
Purposes does the gentlewoman from Florida rise?
Madam Speaker, as member designated by Mr. Buchanan of Florida pursuant to HRES 8, I inform the House that Mr. Buchanan will vote nay on the Rep. Scanlon motion to move the previous question on HRES 38. As the member designated by Mr. Jimenez of the state of Florida pursuant to HRES 8, I inform the House that Mr. Jimenez will vote nay on Rep. Scanlon's motion to move the previous question on HRES 38.
For what purposes does the gentleman from Washington rise?
Thank you, Madam Speaker. As the member designated by Ms. Strickland of Washington, pursuant to House Resolution 8, I inform the House that Ms. Strickland will vote yes on ordering the previous question.
Does the gentleman from Massachusetts rise?
Good evening, Madam Speaker. As the member designated by the Honorable Mr. James Langevin of Rhode Island, and pursuant to House Resolution 965, I'd like to inform the House that Mr. Langevin will vote yes on the motion to move the previous question on House Resolution 38. Thank you.
The gentlewoman from California rise.
Madam Speaker, as the member designate by Mr. Mondaire Jones of New York, pursuant to HRES 8, I inform the House that Mr. Jones will be voting yes on ordering the previous question.
Purposes does the gentlewoman from New Jersey rise?
Madam Speaker, as the member designated by Mr. Schneider pursuant to HRES 8, I inform the House that Mr. Schneider will vote yes on ordering the previous question.
Purposes does the gentleman from Nebraska rise?
Madam Speaker, as a member designated by Mr. Bill Raucus of Florida, pursuant to HRES 8, I inform the House that Mr. Bill Raucus will vote nay on Representative Scanlon's motion to move the previous question on HRES 38.
Kirkpatrick, pursuant to H.R. 8, I inform the House that Representative Kirkpatrick will vote aye on ordering the previous question. As a member designated by Representative Cardenas, pursuant to H.R. 8, I inform the House that Representative Cardenas will vote aye on ordering the previous question.
What purposes does the gentleman from Pennsylvania rise?
Thank you, Madam Speaker. As a member designated by Mr. Doyle of Pennsylvania, pursuant to House Resolution 8, I hereby inform the House that Mr. Doyle will vote yes on ordering the previous question.
For what purposes does the gentlewoman from Illinois rise?
As a member designated by Mr. Carson, pursuant to HRES 8, I inform the House that Mr. Carson will vote yes on ordering the previous question. As the member designated by Mr. Rush, pursuant to HRES 8, I inform the House that Mr. Rush will vote yes on ordering the previous question.
For what purposes does the gentlewoman from New York rise?
Madam Speaker, as the member designated by Mr. Deutsch of Florida, pursuant to HRES 8, I inform the House that Mr. Deutsch will vote yes on ordering the previous question.
For what purposes does the gentleman from Ohio rise?
Okay. As a member designated by Mr. Gonzalez of Ohio, pursuant to House Resolution 8, I inform the House that Mr. Gonzalez of Ohio will vote no on ordering the previous question.
The gentlewoman from Pennsylvania rises.
As the member designated by Ms. Wild pursuant to H-Res 8, I inform the House that Ms. Wild will vote yes on ordering the previous question.
What the gentlewoman from Michigan rise?
As the member designated by Ms. Ocasio-Cortez pursuant to House Res 8, I inform the House that Ms. Ocasio-Cortez will vote yes on ordering the previous question. I'm good, darling. I'm good.
For what purposes does the gentleman from California rise? For what purposes does the gentleman from California rise?
As the member designated by Congressman Jerry McNerney pursuant to H-Res 8, I inform the House that Mr. McNerney will vote yes on ordering the previous question.
For what purposes does the gentleman from Maryland rise?
As the member designated by Ms. Jayapal pursuant to House Resolution 8, I inform the House that Ms. Jayapal will vote aye on ordering the previous question.
On this vote, the yeas are 219 and the nays are 206. The previous question is ordered. The question is on the adoption of the resolution. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it.
Request the yeas and nays.
Pursuant to Section 3S of House Resolution 8, the yeas and nays are ordered. Members will record their vote by electronic device. Purposes of the gentleman from Texas rise.
Madam Speaker, as a member designated by Mr. Baird from Indiana, pursuant to H-Res 8, I inform the House that Mr. Baird will vote no on the Rep. Scanlon motion, on the motion to pass the rules. Need a different thing.
As the gentleman from Pennsylvania rise.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. As a member designated by Mr. Doyle of Pennsylvania, pursuant to House Resolution 8, I hereby inform the House that Mr. Doyle will vote yes on House Resolution 38.
Purposes of the gentlewoman from Pennsylvania rise.
As the member designated by Ms. Wild, pursuant to H-Res 8, I inform the House that Ms. Wild will vote yes on H-Res 38.
Purposes of the gentleman from Nebraska rise. It's got to turn on. For what purposes does the gentleman from Nebraska rise?
Madam Speaker, as the member designated by Mr. Bill Rockus of Florida, pursuant to H-Res 8, I inform the House that Mr. Bill Rockus will vote nay on H-Res 38.
Purposes of the gentlewoman from New York rise.
Madam Speaker, as the member designated by Mr. Deutsch of Florida, pursuant to H-Res 8, I inform the House that Mr. Deutsch will vote yes on H-Res 38.
For what purposes does the gentleman from Massachusetts rise?
Madam Speaker, as the member designated by the Honorable Mr. James Langevin of Rhode Island, pursuant to House Resolution 965, I'd like to inform the House that Mr. Langevin will vote yes on House Resolution 38, the rule to consider House Resolution 21, a resolution calling upon Vice President Michael R. Pence to convene and mobilize the principal officers of the executive departments of the Cabinet, and to activate Section 4 of the 25th Amendment to declare President Donald J. Trump incapable of executing the duties of his office and to immediately exercise powers as acting president. Thank you.
What purposes does the gentlelady from New York rise?
Madam Speaker, as the member designated by Mr. Young of Alaska, pursuant to House Resolutions 8, I inform the House that Mr. Young will vote nay on the rule of House Resolution 21.
Purposes does the gentlewoman from Florida rise?
Madam Speaker, as a member designated by Mr. Payne of New Jersey, pursuant to H-Res 8, I inform the House that Mr. Payne will vote yea on H-Res 38. And, Madam Speaker, as a member designated by Mr. Hastings of Florida, pursuant to H-Res 8, I inform the House that Mr. Hastings will also vote yea on H-Res 38.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Texas rise?
Madam Speaker, as the member designated by Mr. Bergman, pursuant to House Resolution 8, I inform the House that Mr. Bergman will vote no on the rule H-Res 38. Madam Speaker, as the member designated by Mr. Lambourne, pursuant to House Resolution 8, I inform the House that Mr. Lambourne will vote no on rule H-Res 38.
For what purposes does the gentlewoman from Illinois rise?
As a member designated by Mr. Carson pursuant to H-Res 8, I will inform the House that Mr. Carson will vote yes on H-Res 38. I inform the House that Mr. Rush will vote yes on H-Res 38.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Kansas rise?
Madam Speaker, as the member designated by Mr. Jake LaTurner from Kansas, pursuant to House Resolution 8, I inform the House that Mr. LaTurner will vote nay on House Resolution 38.
What purposes does the gentlewoman from California rise?
Madam Speaker, as the member designated by Mr. Mondaire Jones of New York, pursuant to H-Res 8, I inform the House that Mr. Jones will vote yea on H-Res 38.
Gentleman from Ohio rise.
As a member designated by Mr. Gonzalez of Ohio, pursuant to House Resolution 8, I inform the House that Mr. Gonzalez of Ohio will vote no on H-Res 38.
For what purposes does the gentleman from Arizona rise? What purposes does the gentleman from Arizona rise?
As a member designated by Representative Cardenas, pursuant to H.R. 8, I inform the House that Representative Cardenas will vote aye on H.R. 38. As a representative designated by Representative Kirkpatrick, pursuant to H.R. 8, I inform the House that Representative Kirkpatrick will vote aye on H.R. 38.
Gentleman from California rise.
Madam Speaker, as member designated by Congressmember Napolitano, pursuant to House Resolution 8, I wish to inform the House that Congressmember Napolitano will vote yes on H-Res 38. And Madam Speaker, as member designated by Congressmember Costa, pursuant to House Resolution 8, I inform the House that Congressmember Costa will also vote yea on H-Res 38.
For what purposes does the gentlewoman from Massachusetts rise?
As the member designated by Ms. Franco pursuant to H-Res 8, I inform the House that Ms. Franco will vote yes on H-Res 38. As the member designated by Ms. Bonamici pursuant to H-Res 8, I inform the House that Ms. Bonamici will vote yes on H-Res 38.
Excellent mumbling.
For what purposes does the gentleman from California rise?
As the member designated by Congressman Jerry McNerney pursuant to H-Res 8, I inform the House that Mr. McNerney will vote yes on H-Res 38.
For what purposes does the gentleman from New York rise?
As the member designated by Chairwoman Eddie Bernice Johnson pursuant to H-Res 8, I inform the House that Chairwoman Johnson will vote yea on H-Res 38. As the member designated by Chairman Jerry Nadler pursuant to H-Res 8, I inform the House that Chairman Nadler will vote yea on H-Res 38. As the member designated by Congressman Brendan Boyle pursuant to H-Res 8, I inform the House that Congressman Boyle will vote yea on H-Res 38.
Is she from Virginia? For what purposes does the gentlewoman from New Jersey rise?
Madam Speaker, as the member designated... Okay, she did. She did. She just wasn't on the
Purposes does the gentlewoman from New Jersey rise?
Madam Speaker, as the member designated by Mr. Schneider pursuant to H-Res 8, I inform the House that Mr. Schneider will vote yes on H-Res 38.
For what purposes does the gentleman from Virginia rise? What purposes does the gentleman from Virginia rise?
Madam Speaker, as the member designated by Mr. Blumenauer pursuant to H-Res 8, I inform the House that Mr. Blumenauer will vote yes on H-Res 38. As the member designated by Mr. Lowenthal pursuant to H-Res 8, I inform the House that Mr. Lowenthal will vote yes on H-Res 38. As the member designated by Mr. Peters pursuant to H-Res 8, I inform the House that Mr. Peters will vote yes on H-Res 38. As the member designated by Mr. Liu pursuant to H-Res 8, I inform the House that Mr. Liu will vote yes on H-Res 38.
For what purposes does the gentleman from Tennessee rise? For what purposes does the gentleman from Tennessee rise?
Madam Speaker, as the member designated by Mr. Fleischman of Tennessee, pursuant to H-Res 8, I inform the House that Mr. Fleischman will vote no on H-Res 38. As the member designated by Mr. Desjardins of Tennessee, pursuant to H-Res 8, I inform the House that Mr. Desjardins will vote nay on H-Res 38.
For what purposes does the gentleman from Illinois rise?
Madam Speaker, as the member designated by Mr. Grijalva, pursuant to H-Res 8, I inform the House that Mr. Grijalva will vote aye on House Resolution 38. And as the member designated by Ms. Presley of Massachusetts, pursuant to H-Res 8, I inform the House that Ms. Presley will vote yea on H-Res 38.
Connecticut rise.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, as the member designated by Mr. Adam Smith of Washington State pursuant to H-Res 8, I inform the House that Mr. Smith will vote yes on H-Res 8.
For what purposes does the gentleman from Maryland rise?
Madam Speaker, as the member designated by Ms. Alma Adams of North Carolina, pursuant to House Resolution 8, I inform the House that Ms. Adams will vote yes on House Resolution 38.
Purposes does the gentleman from Virginia rise?
Madam Speaker, as the member designated by Ms. Titus of Nevada pursuant to H-Res 8, I inform the House that Ms. Titus will vote yes on H-Res 38.
Does the gentleman from North Carolina rise?
Madam Speaker, as a member designated by Mr. Bishop of Georgia, pursuant to H-Res 8, I inform the House that Mr. Bishop will vote yes. He will vote yes on H-Res 38. Madam Speaker, as a member designated by Mr. Thompson of Mississippi, pursuant to H-Res 8, I inform the House that Mr. Thompson will vote yes. He will vote yes on H-Res 38. Madam Speaker, as a member designated by Mr. Richmond of Louisiana, pursuant to H-Res 8, I inform the House that Mr. Richmond will vote yes. He will vote yes on H-Res 38.
Does the gentlewoman from Michigan rise?
As the member designated by Mrs. Dingle pursuant to House Resolution 8, I inform the House that Mrs. Dingle will vote yea on H-Res 38. As the member designated by Ms. Axney pursuant to House Resolution 8, I inform the House that Ms. Axney votes yea on House Resolution 38. As the member designated by Ms. Lee of Nevada pursuant to House Resolution 8, I inform the House that Ms. Lee votes yea on House Resolution 38. As the member designated by Ms. Capter, pursuant to House Resolution 8, I inform the House that Ms. Capter votes yea on House Resolution 38.
Can I give her mine?
For what purposes does the gentleman from California rise?
As a member designated by Mr. Villa pursuant to H-Res 8, I inform the House that Mr. Villa will vote aye on H-Res 38.
For what purposes does the gentleman from Texas rise?
Madam Speaker, as the member designated by Ms. Fletcher pursuant to H-Res 8, I inform the House that Ms. Fletcher will vote aye on H-Res 38.
Does the gentleman from New Jersey rise?
Madam Speaker, as the member designated by Ms. Bonnie Watson Coleman pursuant to H-Res 8, I inform the House that Ms. Watson Coleman will vote yes on H-Res 38. And as the member designated by Mr. Albio Series pursuant to H-Res 8, I inform the House that Mr. Series will vote yes on H-Res 38. As the member designated by Mr. Bill Pascrell pursuant to H-Res 8, I inform the House that Mr. Pascrell will vote yes on H-Res 38. And finally, Madam Speaker, as the member designated by Mr. Paul Tonko pursuant to H-Res 8, I inform the House that Mr. Tonko will vote yes on H-Res 38. Thank you.
Does the gentlewoman from Kansas rise?
Madam Speaker, as the member designated by Ms. Lager-Fernandez pursuant to H-Res 8, I inform the House that Ms. Lager-Fernandez will vote aye on H-Res 38.
For what purposes does the gentlewoman from Florida rise?
Thank you, Madam Speaker. As the member designated by Mr. Buchanan of the state of Florida pursuant to H-Res 8, I inform the House that Mr. Buchanan will vote nay on H-Res 38.
For what purposes does the gentleman from Maryland rise?
I rise as the member designated by Ms. Jayapal pursuant to House Resolution 8, and I inform the House Ms. Jayapal will vote aye on House Resolution 38.
Purposes, does the gentleman from Indiana rise?
Madam Speaker, as a member designated by Ms. Walorski pursuant to H-Res 8, I inform the House that Ms. Walorski will vote nay on H-Res 38.
Does the gentleman from Washington rise?
Thank you, Madam Speaker. As the member designated by Ms. Strickland of Washington, pursuant to H-Res 8, I inform the House that Ms. Strickland will vote yes on H-Res 38.
Does the gentlewoman from Maine rise?
As the member designated by Ms. Custer of New Hampshire pursuant to H-Res 8, I inform the House that Ms. Custer will vote yes on H-Res 38.
The gentlewoman from Virginia rise?
Thank you, Madam Speaker. As the member designated by Mr. McEachin pursuant to House Resolution 8, I inform the House that Mr. McEachin will vote yes on House Resolution 38. And as the member designated by Ms. Porter pursuant to House Resolution 8, I inform the House that Ms. Porter will vote yes on House Resolution 38.
For what purposes does the gentleman from Pennsylvania rise?
Madam Speaker, as the member designated by Mr. Lawson of Florida, 5th Congressional District, pursuant to House Resolution 8, I inform the House that Mr. Lawson will vote yes on House Resolution 38.
For what purposes does the gentlewoman from Connecticut rise?
As the member designated by Ms. Wilson pursuant to H-Res 8, I inform the House that Ms. Wilson will vote yes on H-Res 38.
what purposes the gentlewoman from Michigan rise?
As the member designated by Ms. Ocasio-Cortez pursuant to House Res. 8, I inform the House that Ms. Ocasio-Cortez will vote yes on House Res. 38.
For what purposes does the gentlewoman from California rise?
Madam Speaker, as a member designated by Mr. DeSaulnier pursuant to H. Res. 8, I inform the House that Mr. DeSaulnier will vote yes on H. Res. 38.
For what purposes does the gentleman from California rise?
Madam Speaker, as a member designated by Ms. Eshoo pursuant to H. Res. 8, I inform the House that Ms. Eshoo will vote yes on H. Res. 38.
On this vote, the yeas are 222 and the nays are 204. The resolution is adopted. Without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Maryland seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, pursuant to House Resolution 38, I call up House Resolution 21 and ask for its immediate consideration in the House.
The clerk will report the title of the resolution.
House Resolution 21, resolution calling on Vice President Michael R. Pence to convene and mobilize the principal officers of the executive departments of the Cabinet to activate Section 4 of the 25th Amendment to declare President Donald J. Trump incapable of executing the duties of his office and to immediately exercise powers as acting president.
Pursuant to House Resolution 38, the amendment to the preamble printed in House Report 117-1 is adopted, and the resolution as amended is considered read. The resolution as amended shall be debatable for 1 hour, equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member of the Committee on the Judiciary or their respective designees. The gentleman from Maryland, Mr. Raskin, and the gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Jordan, each will control 30 minutes. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Maryland, Mr. Raskin.
Mr. Speaker, thank you. I ask unanimous consent that all members may have 5 legislative days within which to revise and extend their remarks and insert extraneous material on HRes 21.
Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, I yield to myself 3 minutes to begin.
The gentleman is recognized for 3 minutes.
We've experienced the trauma of a violent attack on this House of Representatives, on this chamber, and on all of the people who work here. An armed, lawless, and enraged mob smashed windows, beat up and crushed Capitol Hill police officers who cried out in agony, overcame and subdued law enforcement, killed or caused the deaths of at least 5 American citizens, including a heroic Capitol Hill police officer, Brian Sicknick, and 4 other Americans, inflicted serious injuries on dozens of our police officers and other people, including 15 officers who had to be hospitalized. Chanting, "Stop the steal," and "Hang Mike Pence," they threatened the lives and safety of the 3 individuals in the line of succession to the President of the United States. They built a gallows right outside the Capitol. They screamed, "Where's Nancy?" They stormed the Speaker's office and they occupied it. They stole government property. They trashed the place. They terrorized officers, staff, and members. They brandished the Confederate battle flag in the Capitol of the United States, something that didn't even happen during the Civil War. They allowed hundreds or thousands of people to enter the Capitol without metal detector or any kind of security screening at all. Not only to desecrate the temple of democracy and to spit in the face of Congress, but actually to interfere with the counting of electoral college votes in the 2020 presidential election. They may have been looking for Vice President Pence and Speaker Pelosi, but every person in this room could have died. As a shaken Senator Lindsey Graham said, the mob could have blown the building up. They could have killed us all. Mr. Speaker, whether or not you believe the President's course of conduct in encouraging, building, summoning, assembling, and inflaming the mob, lighting the flame, as Congresswoman Liz Cheney put it in a very powerful and cogent statement this evening, whether you believe that that was a high crime and misdemeanor, an offense against the Republic, that's the question for another time. And to put my cards on the table, I think it was a crime against the Republic. But leaving that aside, I think every member in this body should be able to agree that this president is not meeting the most minimal duties of office He is not meeting the oath that he swore to uphold and defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. He is not protecting and defending the democracy itself, the process of electing the president. He is not respecting the peaceful transfer of power. He is not taking care that the laws are faithfully executed. He is not protecting the republic against mob insurrection, invasion, and hostility. He is not protecting the Republican form of government for the people of the United States when he allows this to happen. This resolution is simply asking Vice President Pence to exercise his powers under Article 25, the 25th Amendment. I grant myself 30 seconds more.
Gentleman is granted 30 additional seconds. You may proceed.
We are simply asking Vice President Pence to exercise his powers under the 25th Amendment of the Constitution, Section 4, to convene the cabinet and to mobilize the cabinet to state and articulate what is obvious to the American people. This president is not meeting the duties of office and is clearly not capable of it, and to transfer the powers to the vice president under the 25th Amendment. With that, I will yield now for 1 minute time. Oh, I will reserve the remainder.
Gentleman reserve. At this time, the gentleman from Ohio is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would yield to the gentleman from the great state of California, Mr. McClintock, for 2.5 minutes.
Gentleman is recognized for 2.5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. What a sad and ominous way to begin the 117th Congress. Hasn't this body done enough in the last session to divide our country and abuse our Constitution without carrying that damage into the new session? The 25th Amendment specifically addresses the incapacity of the President to discharge the duties of his office. It was never intended as a political weapon when Congress doesn't like the way he discharges those duties. Now, I've read that speech. He never suggested rampaging the Capitol and disrupting the Congress. He urged them to, and this is an exact quote, peacefully and patriotically make your voices heard. Now, many of us Republicans joined a bipartisan vote to respect the Electoral College votes, despite our suspicions and our misgivings and our desires. We did this because the Constitution commanded it and our institutions depend on it. Now, today, those same principles should compel a bipartisan vote to oppose this grotesque abuse of the 25th Amendment. Last week, the majority argued that the President tried to misuse the Constitution to overturn the votes of the Electoral College. Well, he asserted no direct power. Rather, he urged the Vice President and Congress to do so. Many of us declined his bad advice. Yet this week, the majority directly is asserting power to misuse the 25th Amendment in a manner that does overturn the votes of the previous Electoral College. Don't they see that they are committing directly the same offense they accuse the President of committing indirectly? Every act we take builds a precedent for future acts. Once Congress asserts this new role as armchair psychiatrists and a new power to equate intemperate speech with functional disability, the most important pillars of our government, stability, the rule of law, and the separation of powers, will fracture. It won't affect this president, but it will stalk future presidents from this day forward. For their sake, please don't do this. Yield back.
Does the gentleman reserve? All right, the gentleman from Maryland is recognized.
I now yield 1 minute to Speaker Nancy Pelosi.
The Speaker of the House, Ms. Pelosi of California, is recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I thank the gentleman for yielding and applaud him and salute him as a constitutional scholar, an intellectual resource, and the force of justice that he has been as he has crafted and advanced this resolution. And I thank the entire House for determination to protect our democracy and the loyalty to our oath that had been so beautifully manifested in this dark past week. Mr. Speaker, a dark week it has been indeed. On Wednesday, the President of the United States incited a deadly insurrection against America that targeted the very heart of our democracy, this temple of democracy, the United States Capitol. Defiling the genius of the Constitution, separate but equal, attacking the first branch of government, trying to prevent us from ascertaining our constitutional duty to ascertain that Joe Biden and Kamala Harris will be President and Vice President of the United States. The gleeful desecration of the Capitol and the violence against Congress, our staff, and our workers are horrors that will forever stain our nation's history. 5 Americans have died following the violent attack. More than 50 police officers were seriously injured, including 15 officers who were hospitalized. On behalf of the House, I salute and express deepest gratitude to U.S. Capitol Police for the valor that they showed in protecting the lives of members, but especially protecting our staff and those who make Congress function. Mr. Speaker, this is a sad day for our country that we have to come to the floor in a way to defend the Constitution of the United States at this time. The facts are very clear. The President called for this seditious attack. For days, he urged supporters to come to Washington for the insurrection. Wednesday morning, he participated in a rally to encourage the rioters to march on the Capitol and fight. And not only did he urge people to march on the Capitol and fight, he further fanned the flames, and he and his family cheered and celebrated the desecration of the Capitol. Later that day, as the dangers escalated, he ignored and flat out rejected the pleas of Congress, including those of his own party, to call off his supporters, the rioters, the terrorists, as they engaged in vandalism and violence. Later and now the President is saying that he is not responsible and that his incitement to violence was totally appropriate. The President's actions demonstrate his absolute inability to discharge the most basic and fundamental powers and duties of his office. Therefore, the President must be removed from office immediately. This is a decision we make with the utmost solemnity and prayerfulness, which this crisis requires. Removal of the President is an unprecedented action, but it is required because it is an unprecedented moment in history because the danger that he poses. And I heard the previous speaker say that we are objecting to the President because we don't like the way he executes his duties. No, we don't like it at all. Acts of sedition, incitement to insurrection, treasonous activity. And if you are associating yourself with that as the proper execution of the President's duties, you are associating yourself with sedition and treason. Yesterday, in a pro forma section, we introduced a unanimous consent request to take up Congressman Raskin's legislation, which calls on the Vice President to mobilize the Cabinet to activate the 25th Amendment to remove the President from office. Again, to prevent him from causing more damage to our country. Who knows what he might do next? But House Republicans rejected this legislation. And so the President's unhinged, unstable, deranged acts of sedition may continue, endangering America and undermining our democracy. Now we are taking up this legislation in regular session. After passage, we are calling on the Vice President to respond within 24 hours of passage. This resolution gives House Republicans the clear choice to honor the oath of office, to defend our democracy, and to uphold the sacred trust given to us by the Constitution and by those whom we represent. Mr. Speaker, during the Trump presidency, this 4 years, and especially during this sad time, I recall the words of the great Israeli poet Ehud Manor. And that's what he said when he said, I can't keep silent in light of how my country has changed her face. Won't quit trying to remind her in her ears, I'll sing my cries until she opens her eyes. I can't keep silent of how my country's changed her face. I urge my Republican colleagues to open their eyes and to finally hold this president accountable. The security of our country and the future of our very democracy are at stake. When we pray for God to bless America, let us hope that that blessing comes down strongly on us in the next few days. With that, Mr. Speaker, I yield back the balance of my time and again applaud the great leadership of Mr. Raskin.
The Speaker yields back. Does the gentleman from Maryland reserve?
I reserve, yes.
The gentleman from Ohio is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I will yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Klein.
The gentleman is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today in opposition to House Resolution 21, calling on Vice President Pence to invoke Section 4 of the 25th Amendment. Like all of us, I condemn in the strongest possible terms the violence that occurred here in our nation's capital last week. Political violence is never the answer, regardless of which side of the political spectrum it occurs. And that's a strongly held position on which I've been clear since well before my time in Congress. Let's be clear about a few things. The adoption of this political resolution would be divisive rather than unifying. The Vice President has said he has no intention of taking action under the amendment, so this process is pure political theater on the part of the majority. In addition, no due process has been provided. As a former prosecutor, if law enforcement brought evidence of a crime to me and said, take this to the jury tomorrow for a jury trial, there would be no chance for the defendant to prepare any defense. I'd be violating half the Constitution, the Code of Virginia, over 100 different rules of procedure. In the more than 50 years since the 25th Amendment was ratified, Section 4 has never been invoked. As such, there are no judicial or authoritative opinions that would evaluate its implementation. And absent this, we must look to the legislative intent of the Congress that passed its language. And nowhere in the legislative intent is the current situation envisioned. It's meant to be used for incapacity, not for political ends with 8 days remaining in a president's term. Last week, Vice President Pence was lauded by the majority for not yielding to pressure to exert power beyond his constitutional authority to determine the outcome of the election. Yet, the majority today is attempting to pressure him to exert power beyond the intention of his constitutional role in Section 4 of the 25th Amendment. This action will only further fuel the political divide among our citizens and will be detrimental to the long-term efforts to unify our country. Mr. Speaker, both President Trump and President-elect Biden have called for a peaceful transition of power. I would encourage members of both parties to work toward this end and vote against this rushed, misguided, politically motivated resolution. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back.
Reserve.
The gentleman reserve. The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Maryland.
I now yield 1 minute to Ms. Lofgren.
The gentlelady from California, Ms. Laufe, the chairman of the House Administration Committee, is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, last week as we counted electoral college votes, I said this day marks a crossroads for our American democracy. We didn't know then what an ominous statement that was. We do now. Congress was attacked by a violent mob incited by the president to stop us from doing our constitutional job. The president not only encouraged the mob, he said he loved them and made no serious effort to stop them. Lives were lost and put in danger. Constitutional government was urgently threatened. The president's actions were not only wrong, they were dangerous. He lives in an alternate reality. He's a continuing threat to America. Vice President Pence should invoke the 25th Amendment, assume presidential duties until the inauguration next week, and save us from a president who is unable to function, unable to protect our country. I urge all, including my Republican colleagues, to put politics aside. Act to secure the safety of our country. We truly are at a crossroads for our American democracy.
The gentleman from Maryland.
I reserve.
Reserve? All right. The gentleman from Ohio is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Arizona, Mr. Davis.
The gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The violence at the Capitol last week has been condemned by Republicans, Democrats, and by President Trump. So I wonder, why are the Democrats stoking the fire instead of dousing the flames? This 25th Amendment resolution is actually similar with some differences from the proposal filed in October of this year by this same representative and joined by 42 Democrats. The problem that time is they were trying to get this commission together. This time they want the vice president to invoke the other portion of Article 4. But the problem, of course, is the vice president sent a very lovely letter to them saying he's not going to do that. So our nation is divided. And while folks on the left are trying to lay this all on President Trump, you should consider a few statements from colleagues across the aisle. One of our colleagues at one point said, if you see anybody from that cabinet, meaning Mr. Trump's cabinet, in a restaurant, a department store, a gas station, you get out and you create a crowd and you push back on them and you tell them they're not welcome here. They're not welcome anymore anywhere. Senator Booker called for his supporters to go to the Hill today. Get up, and please get up in the face of some Congress people. And I have dozens of more similar statements. But what we're talking about here today is a resolution asking the Vice President to invoke the 25th Amendment and get the cabinet together to remove this president. And what that does, it is basically doing what Democrats wrongfully claim President Trump did on January 6th. It pours gas on the smoldering embers, which consist of tens of millions who believe the integrity of the election was questionable. They feel disenfranchised, and quite frankly, they are more angry than aggrieved. Some believe that by doing this is going to be healing. I heard this gentleman say this in the Rules Committee, that doing this today would be healing. And yet the Vice President said he's not going to do that. And if this resolution is to ask the Vice President to invoke this 25th Amendment,
the gentleman has an additional 30 seconds.
Thank you. If this is what the purpose of this is, to ask the Vice President, then the purpose is now null. But I suggest to you, it would appear like, if we're going to proceed on, even after you've received the answer that you're seeking, and it's disapprobation of your idea, that the only thing that could be left is to pour gas on a fire. And I'm asking that cooler heads prevail here. This is not necessary. Don't let this get in the way. And just to parrot the last speaker, I'm asking friends across the aisle, don't do this thing.
The gentleman from Ohio, you reserve. The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Maryland.
Mr. Speaker, the gentleman reasonably poses the question, why are we doing this? We think that the President of the United States constitutes a clear and present danger to the Republic and to our people. For example, on the white supremacist websites that helped to build the President's mob, they are now calling for a return engagement on the days of January 19th and 20. They are calling again for an attack on the Capitol, and they're calling again for the state legislatures now in 50 states to be surrounded. What will the attitude be of the President of the United States? Will he give them aid and comfort? Will he wink at them? Will he send them positive tweets and messages calling them patriots? Also on extreme right-wing websites, they are calling for the President to pardon the organizers of the armed violent insurrection that took place in this body not even a week ago. And what if the President decides to pardon them? We know this President is not living up to the most minimal duties of his office. That's why we are doing this, to protect the public. And by the way, we're not telling the Vice President what he must do. We have no authority to do that. We're telling him what he thinks he should do, and that the Congress will be with him, because we know that he has come under extreme right-wing pressure on everything from the counting of the Electoral College votes to his positions on a whole range of things to go along with Donald Trump. So we are trying to counterbalance that attack on him from the right to say the people want to see a peaceful way through this. With that, I will recognize Ms. Jackson-Lee for 1 minute.
The gentlelady from Texas, Ms. Jackson-Lee, is recognized.
Accountability comes before healing, but healing should come. If we look at the Constitution, we will clearly see that Mr. Raskin's resolution fits the language, an inability to be able to discharge your duties, to exercise the laws carefully. Do you consider these words from the President of the United States to insurrectionists and terrorists to walk down to the Capitol, tells the president, telling them if you don't fight like hell, you're not going to have a country anymore. And that is the attack that the domestic terrorists made on this place. All we're asking the Vice President through this resolution is to reflect on that and to call upon the 25th Amendment to convene the cabinet to begin the healing, because the President of the United States is dangerous to the American people. That is why we're on the floor today. We hope that he will have an opportunity to reflect, because the Constitution says in many places that the actions of this president is dangerous. People have died. We have lost 2 police officers. Others are in the hospital. And yes, it was an insurrection. It is time to pass H-Res 21. I yield
Gentlelady's
back.
time has expired. The gentleman from Maryland, do you reserve?
Yes.
The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Ohio.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield 1 minute to the gentlelady from Georgia.
The gentlelady from Georgia is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to quote the President of the United States. I know that everyone here will soon be marching over to the Capitol building to peacefully and patriotically make your voices heard. Go home with peace, with love, and in peace. Remember this day forever. President Donald Trump. I condemn this violence. Republicans have condemned this violence. President Trump has condemned this violence. But elected Democrats over the past year have promoted violence, have supported it. They fund it on their Act Blue fundraising platform, and there has been billions of damage caused over this past year in riots all over this country. You know how many companies have endured violence and destruction? I have 83 pages here of businesses that had property damage, were burned, and through the Minnesota riots. Our president, or vice president-elect Kamala Harris, posted the Minnesota Freedom Fund bail link, encouraging people to donate money to bail criminals out of jail.
The gentlelady's time has expired.
I yield back.
The gentlelady yields back. The gentleman from Ohio, do you reserve?
We reserve.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from Maryland.
Mr. Speaker, I'm honored to yield 2 minutes to Mr. Katko of New York.
Thank you, my colleague, for yielding. I rise as a proud American who has the distinct honor of serving in this great body. As a member of Congress, we take an oath to defend the Constitution because at times it needs defending. On January 6th, the nation watched as insurrectionists stormed the Capitol, threatening the safety of countless individuals and successfully, albeit temporarily, disrupting our process. In the midst of the attack, hundreds of Capitol police officers heroically upheld their duty to defend the United States and protect those who work here. Many officers were severely injured and beaten, including one of my former interns. And tragically, one officer, Officer Brian Sicknick, succumbed to the injuries he sustained. To Officer Sicknick's family, I extend my deepest condolences and know that we are praying for you. And to all Capitol Police officers, we are deeply thankful for your bravery. Because of you, thousands of lives were protected and the people's work was able to resume. Now, just as the Capitol Police protected us, Congress must match that courage and protect the Constitution, our democratic processes, and this nation. The President's role in this insurrection is undeniable, both on social media ahead of January 6th and in his speech that day. He deliberately promoted baseless theories, creating a combustible environment of misinformation and division. To allow the President of the United States to incite this attack without consequences is a direct threat to the future of this democracy. For this reason, I will vote to impeach this President tomorrow. The bill before us tonight is a non-binding resolution which requests the Vice President to invoke the 25th Amendment, a step he has already said he will not take. It is merely a symbolic gesture, and I will oppose that resolution. After last week's attack on the Capitol, it is clear our nation is more divided than ever in recent history. We began this great experiment over 240 years ago, and to preserve it, we must remember that our faith, race, or political party is not what unites us. What unites us is that we are Americans. I'd encourage members of this body and everyone at home to remember that simple truth. And with that, I yield back.
Back. The gentleman from Ohio, do you reserve?
No, I will yield.
Maryland reserves.
I will yield 2.5 minutes to the gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Bishop.
The gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Bishop, is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the gentleman for yielding. Two questions as we begin another 24 hours that will deepen the wounds of the country and the disaffection among Americans. First, will you stop at nothing? Second, is there any hypocrisy too far? Let's call this what it is: an ultimatum, an attempt to intimidate and bully Vice President Pence. They're not seeking just the same ends. As Mr. McClintock, the gentleman from California, said, they employ the same means. They seek to bully the Vice President to abuse power under the 25th Amendment, intended to provide for temporary or sudden incapacity of the President, while they claim to be scandalized about the President bullying the Vice President 1 week ago to abuse power under the 12th Amendment. With all due respect for the gentleman from Maryland, he has not answered, why are you doing this now? Tonight, the Vice President has clarified in a letter sent to all of us at 7:34 p.m. that this resolution has absolutely no other purpose. Here are three key things he said, and I quote, "I urge you and every member of Congress to avoid actions that would further divide and inflame the passions of the moment. Work with us to lower the temperature and unite our country." Quote, "As you know full well, the 25th Amendment was designed to address presidential incapacity or disability. Under our Constitution, the 25th Amendment is not a means of punishment or usurpation." Quote, and listen to this one carefully. Quote, "Last week, I did not yield to pressure to exert power beyond my constitutional authority, and I will not now yield to efforts in the House to play political games at a time so serious in the life of our nation." The Vice President has given you your answer before you ask the question. No legitimate purpose to this resolution remains. Your ultimatum does violence to a core feature of the architecture of the Constitution. The framers were emphatic about their purpose to avoid making the President a creature of Congress. The 25th Amendment was not ratified to change that, as you well know. Please do not pervert this important protection to undermine the Constitution. I yield back.
Members are reminded to direct their comments to the chair. The gentleman from Maryland.
I yield 1 minute to Representative Cohen from Tennessee.
Gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Raskin. Last Wednesday, I came to these hallowed halls where I serve to watch the Electoral College ratify and certify the election of Joe Biden in what was a fair, transparent election, which 61 courts had looked into and all said it was fine. I was sitting right up there in the gallery when a Capitol policeman came in and said, "We're locking the doors. We are locking the doors." And with only minutes of that, I heard the rabble knocking on the door, trying to knock it down. We were then told to put on our gas masks and to evacuate, and we all did it. This was an assault on the Constitution, an assault on Congress. It was a felonious assault. It was an attempt to murder the Congress and our processes to elect our President of the United States. It is the political equivalent of shooting somebody on Fifth Avenue and getting away with it. And somebody needs to stand up to that, and the 25th Amendment is one way to do it, where the Republicans can purge themselves of their own creation who has damaged this country. I ask us to pass this resolution, bring this country together, and get rid of this cancer. I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back. Does the gentleman reserve?
Yes, I do.
The gentleman from Ohio.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield 1 minute to the gentleman from Wisconsin.
The gentleman from Wisconsin is recognized.
Thank you. This is an absurd resolution callously politicizing an unpredictable tragedy last week. We all know that President Trump called for a peaceful and patriotic march. I must have attended a half dozen Trump rallies in the past year, and they've always been peaceful, wholesome events, typical of the thousands of peaceful protesters who remained away from the Capitol last week. I never would have expected this in a million years. This is a horrible event, but not like the Black Lives Matter Antifa events that went on day after day and city after city, with prominent Democrats fanning the flames by mischaracterizing police shootings or apparently encouraging bail for lawbreakers. Less than 2 years ago, a member of this body encouraged harassment of Trump officers at restaurants, gas stations, or department stores. And what happened? She was rewarded with the chairmanship of an A committee. Even in last week's riots, the Speaker tried to preposterously racialize them, which can only lead to trouble, maybe violence. Everybody back home says we ought to get along. Is this the way to start things? It's time to get back to dealing with the people's business, dealing with the cancer culture of this beginning. Thank you.
The gentleman yields back. The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Maryland.
I yield 1 minute to the distinguished gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Johnson.
The gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Johnson, is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. For 244 years, America has stood as the world's bellwether of democracy. Last week, the world saw America at perhaps her lowest moment. It was crazy. We all took the same oath when we swore to protect this country from enemies both foreign and domestic. And now, with a domestic enemy having arisen that is crazy, only the Vice President has the power to invoke the 25th Amendment and protect this country from this domestic enemy. The 25th Amendment was written for this moment, and if not now, when would its use ever be appropriate? Vice President Pence, you have an opportunity to put country before self by implementing the 25th Amendment. Please muster the courage to protect America from maniacal behavior that threatens the very foundations of our democracy. Stop the violence, Mr. Vice President. And with that, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Ohio.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Shabbat.
Gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. What happened last Wednesday at the Capitol never should have happened. The actions of those who attempted to breach the Capitol building and then ultimately did are inexcusable. Lawlessness and violence are never acceptable, whichever side of the political divide one may fall. Those who broke the law should be and will be identified and prosecuted. In the aftermath of last week's tragic events, most Americans continue to be saddened, angry, and wanting answers. And they are looking to us to provide a positive example of how to bring our nation back together. Unfortunately, if what we're doing this evening is any indication, Congress might not be up to the task. The Democrats' attempt to invoke the 25th Amendment and to once again impeach President Trump a week before he'll be leaving office anyway are, in my opinion, misguided. The push to encourage the Vice President to invoke the 25th Amendment is especially ill-advised. The Constitution is clear that the role for Congress to play under the 25th Amendment is to decide if the powers provided thereunder have been properly invoked in the event of a dispute between the President and Vice President or the majority of the Cabinet. In other words, we are to serve as judges under the 25th Amendment, not instigators. By encouraging the Vice President to take action, supporters of this resolution are abandoning our constitutional role, which could have a significant legal consequence down the road. And even more importantly, rather than help to heal a divided nation, the Democrats' effort will likely drive us even further apart. Instead, Mr. Speaker, we should be turning our attention towards uniting the American people. It's time for us to tone down the political rhetoric, to work together, to solve the problems that face our nation. It's time for us to put aside our differences and find common ground. After all, we're all Americans. I yield back.
All right, the gentleman from Ohio reserves. Mr. Raskin,
you have 1 minute to Mr. Swalwell from California.
Gentleman from California is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, on January 6th...
How much time did you yield, Mr. Raskin? 1 minute. Yes.
Mr. Speaker, on January 6th, Donald Trump incited radicalized terrorists to attack the Capitol to stop the counting of electoral ballots. Donald Trump won't protect life and cannot uphold our Constitution, so we must do so today. It's time for our country to unite, but unity in a national crisis starts with accountability, and that starts here in the People's House. So let's unite against the violence incited by Donald Trump to stop a peaceful transition of power and unite for the safety of all Americans. Let's unite against a president whose hate speech led to the death of a law enforcement officer, and unite for the cops and military who bravely defended the Capitol. Let's unite against Donald Trump, who inspired terrorists to carry a Confederate flag into this Capitol, display a noose, and desecrate the people's house. And let's unite for the custodial staff, largely people of color, who cleaned up after those white supremacists because they still believe in this democracy, as imperfect as it was that day. The most essential function of a president is to protect life and defend liberty. Donald Trump has failed to do that and is failing to do that, so Vice President Pence must invoke the 25th Amendment. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Ohio.
Mr. Speaker, may I inquire how much time each side has?
The gentleman from Ohio has 16½ minutes remaining. From Maryland has 16¾ minutes remaining. The gentleman from Ohio.
Mr. Speaker, I yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Stubbe.
Gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would be remiss if I didn't address the atrocities occurring right here on the House floor today. A week ago, this building was attacked, and instead of working with Republicans to attempt to prevent that from ever happening again, the Speaker and her Democratic colleagues think an appropriate response is to prevent members from exercising their Second Amendment constitutional rights in the very place that wasn't secure a week ago. This attack didn't come from the inside. It came from the outside. And to respond by restricting members' Second Amendment rights in the very institution that is supposed to uphold those rights is appalling. Take note, America. This is what you have to look forward to in a Joe Biden administration. If they can do it right here in the People's House, they will attempt to do it across the country. The plain language of the 25th Amendment is abundantly clear. And although I am an attorney, you don't have to be an attorney to understand that the Vice President is the principle required to invoke the amendment. The beginning of Section 4 states, whenever the VP and a majority of either principal officers of the executive departments or of such other body as Congress may provide by law declare the President's unable to discharge. You must have the Vice President invoking this, and you don't. The Vice President has been clear. He is unwilling to invoke the 25th Amendment. It's not Congress's role to override him. It doesn't state in the amendment that Congress makes that determination. The Vice President does. But my Democratic colleagues will stop at nothing to remove this president even a week before his term expires. The plain reading of the 25th Amendment demonstrates that this is the wrong approach. An understanding of last week's events demonstrates this is the wrong approach. And a consideration of the political tactics that we have seen in the recent days, months, and years tells you that this is a disingenuous approach at best and 100% politically motivated. I was elected in 2018, and my entire congressional career has been consumed by impeaching or removing President Trump. And after the Russia collusion hoax, and then a phone call to the Ukrainian president, and then a failed impeachment attempt that resulted in an acquittal, here we are, a little more than a week away from a new president being sworn in, attempting this travesty both to the Constitution and to America as a whole. This is dangerous, unconstitutional, and does nothing to heal this country and move this country forward.
The gentleman from Ohio reserves. The gentleman from Maryland.
I yield 1 minute to Representative Garcia from Texas.
The gentlelady from Texas is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I stand before the House floor today alarmed that just days ago, a sitting president stirred up a deadly attack on our U.S. Capitol. I join my colleagues in calling on Vice President Pence to activate Section 4 of the 25th Amendment. It has become abundantly clear that this president has threatened our democratic system, has interfered with the peaceful transition of power, and has endangered an equal branch of government. The President of the United States is unhinged, unfit, and unstable, or as we say in my district, está loco el hombre, to the point where he's willing to tear our democracy down unless he prevails in his quest to overturn the election that he clearly lost. The actions taken by this president and those who enable him show that he is unfit to uphold the duties of his office. For the sake of our nation's security, this president must be swiftly removed. Mr. Speaker, democracy is a gift one generation gives to the next. We must defend it.
Expired.
Thank you, and I yield back
Gentlelady
the
yields
remainder of my
back.
time.
The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Ohio.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield a minute and a half to the gentlelady from Colorado, Ms. Boebert.
Gentlelady is recognized for 1.5 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to oppose yet another Democrat witch hunt. We should take Democrats at their word when they say never let a good crisis go to waste. While Section 4 of the 25th Amendment has never been used, a plain reading of the text coupled with the context of its ratification contemplates a very different scenario from the one we are currently in. It envisions a president's disability resulting in serious illness to injury. To suggest it should be used in a different context violates the very intent of the 25th Amendment. To be clear, this resolution is a divisive political stunt which would have no force of law and is a waste of our time. Mr. Speaker, this resolution is a clear overreach, as invoking the 25th Amendment is not something Congress can initiate, and this must be initiated by the executive branch. Democrats talk about unity, but clearly that's just talk, as their actions only further divide us. Their hypocrisy is on full display this week with this 25th Amendment stunt, articles of impeachment, censure bills, and other efforts to try to punish Republicans for false accusations of inciting the type of violence they have so frequently and transparently supported in the past. Throughout 2020, we witnessed Democrats welcome, encourage, and even normalize violence. For them, violent riots were effective in advancing their agenda.
The gentlelady's time has expired. The gentleman from Ohio reserves. The gentleman from Maryland.
Nice job, Lauren. Yeah, we reserve.
Mr. Speaker, very quickly, the gentlelady whom I've not had the pleasure to meet yet confuses disability and incapacity. Franklin D. Roosevelt was in a wheelchair. He had a disability, and he was one of our greatest presidents. President Lincoln, according to historians, suffered from depression, but he was one of our greatest presidents. Incapacity is different. Incapacity is demonstrated by President Trump's complete, total inability to conform his conduct to the rule of law and the Constitution. I yield 1 minute to Representative McBath.
Gentlelady from Georgia, Ms. McBath, is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I came to Congress to make sure that no parent ever experienced the pain that I have. I came to Congress to fight for children who've practiced active shooter drills at the same time that they're simply learning how to read, for families who've lost loved ones to gun violence, and for communities that will never, ever be the same. Last Wednesday, members of this body hid from insurrectionists behind barricades and locked doors. Staffers of this hallowed institution text to their loved ones. They're banging on the doors outside, "I love you." And citizens of this nation watched in real time as rioters stormed the Capitol through shattered windows and broken glass. The result of the president's rhetoric has left 5 Americans dead. Our response to anyone who seeks to overthrow the will of the people must be unwavering and resolute. I didn't come to Congress to do this, but President Trump's actions warrant his immediate removal from office. And I yield back the balance.
Gentlelady yields back. The gentleman from Maryland reserves. Yes. The gentleman from Ohio.
Yield a minute and a half to the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Fowler.
The gentleman from Texas is recognized for 1.5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to speak against this resolution. I'm at a loss. I can't believe the very first time that I have the honor and privilege to address this august chamber is to talk about removing the President of the United States because he held a permitted, legal, and peaceful rally. It's nothing but a wasteful political grandstand. Let's make no mistake. January 6th was a dark day in our esteemed nation's history. It was a dark and sad day. On the afternoon of January 6th, a mob breached our sacred Capitol. Donald Trump didn't. A mob destroyed property and vandalized historic treasures and ran amok on these grounds. But Donald Trump didn't. A mob committed despicable and evil acts of violence against fellow Americans. But Donald Trump didn't. In fact, Donald Trump urged, and in fact demanded, peaceful dissent and nothing more. Our colleagues on the other side of the aisle want us to unnecessarily remove a president when we're measuring the time he has left, not in years, months, weeks or days. He's got 182 hours left in office. You don't achieve unity by simply saying it. You achieve unity through actions. This resolution accomplishes not unity, but rather is a waste of time and fosters further divisiveness. And I'm going to vote no on this resolution. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Maryland.
I yield to Representative Neguse for 1 minute.
Gentleman from Colorado is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, I had planned remarks here, but I have to respond to my colleague. His words are simply too much to bear. He talks a lot about the mob and culpability. Who summoned the mob? Who encouraged the mob? Who incited the mob? You know as well as I do that the President did. I stood here 6 days ago in this exact same spot, and I quoted Lincoln's admonition that we shall nobly save or meanly lose the last best hope of earth. And less than 10 minutes later, a violent mob breached the Capitol, the first breach of this hallowed building, the citadel of liberty since the War of 1812. The Congress must respond. Our undertaking here is not about politics. It is a matter of conscience. I support the distinguished gentleman from Maryland's resolution. I pray that the Vice President will honor his oath, reconsider, and invoke the provisions of the 25th Amendment. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Ohio.
Yield 3 minutes to the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Gates.
Gentleman from Florida, Mr. Gates, is recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, they may be calling on the Vice President, but based on his letter, he's not answering. Everybody in this country knows that they wanted to impeach President Trump on his first day in office. And it looks like they're going to want to impeach him on his last day, too. But all he did in the middle was rescue our economy, rebuild our military, reform the VA, and reduce America's involvement in foreign wars. Now, I join the bipartisan caucus condemning the violence that we saw at our Capitol, but the hypocrisy is just downright disorienting. President Trump called for protests that would be peaceful and patriotic. He got labeled a national security threat. Yet the gentlelady from California can call on her supporters to get physical and in the faces of Republicans, and she gets the chairmanship of the Financial Services Committee. Republican members of Congress utilized a process contemplated in the Constitution to offer an objection, and we were labeled seditionists. Democrat members of Congress raised funds for groups attacking our police, burning our cities, destroying our businesses, establishing autonomous zones, and they were celebrated as justice warriors. Wednesday, they called for unity, democracy, and healing. Now, just days later, seeking power and political advantage, the Democrats have reverted to the mean. They've gone back to their natural state, the party of impeachment, removal, and division. They're about to have unified control of the government. Maybe they'd use this time to preview an agenda for the American people. Now, the last two times the 25th Amendment was invoked, it was to facilitate a colonoscopy. Now they're using it to facilitate a transition to Joe Biden. How weird. Why? I'd call it virtue signaling, but there is no virtue in it. This removal effort isn't for America. It's for them, for their ability to showcase and wield power. And we see the power of cancellation and removal on full display in America today. Forbes magazine has called for White House officials to be shamed and unemployable. ABC News has called for the cleansing of the Trump movement. I don't know what that means, but talking about cleansing our fellow human beings sure is scary. Big tech has driven consumers and conservatives off of monopolistic platforms. And then when we created our own platform, Parler, it was nuked from the internet altogether. The gentlelady from New York was booted from a Harvard advisory board because she took an adverse position on electors that had been taken by every single member of the Congressional Black Caucus in 2001. Cancellations for some, celebrations for others, for doing the exact same thing. The President of the United States can't tweet or post on Facebook, but we know from Project Veritas that the principal counsel for PBS can call for the government to steal children from Republicans and throw Molotov cocktails at the White House.
We should allow America to heal before America is lost, but that is not happening today. I'd request 30 more seconds.
The gentleman is given 30 additional seconds.
The deal now is House Democrats just want in on the act. That's the purpose of the resolution today. They want to show you that they can still tear things down. I guess over the next 2 years, we'll see if they're capable of building anything or anyone up. This is a deeply unpopular impeachment. The public wishes we were here dealing with coronavirus, not the virus of Trump hatred that you seem to have found no vaccine for. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Ohio reserves. The gentleman from Maryland is now recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I heard one of our colleagues say it was the fault of the mob, not Donald Trump. But who summoned the mob? Who created the mob? Who assembled it? Well, you don't have to trust us if you don't like what you call Democrat members. We do prefer Democratic members for the new ones. But how about this? Listen to the chair of your own conference. The chair of the Republican conference, Liz Cheney, said, the President of the United States summoned this mob, assembled the mob, and lit the flame of this attack. Everything that followed was his doing. None of this would have happened without the President. So you can hate the Democrat members all you want. That is the chair of the Republican conference, Mr. Speaker. I yield 1 minute to Ms. Maloney.
New York, Ms. Maloney, the chair of the Government Oversight Committee, is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Like all of us in this chamber, the Vice President and the Cabinet swore in their oaths of office to protect and defend the Constitution from enemies, foreign and domestic. Now they must fulfill that oath by invoking the 25th Amendment. Donald Trump's reckless actions on and leading to January 6th underscore that he is a clear and present danger to our democratic traditions. He repeatedly and blatantly lied, spouting baseless claims of a stolen election and fraud. He called on his supporters to come to D.C. on January 6th, a day which he said, I quote, will be wild, end quote, and willfully incited an armed and deadly insurrection against another branch of our government. President Trump must be held accountable, and we must return to the peaceful transfer of power. I urge a yes vote and yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. The gentleman from Maryland reserves. The gentleman from Ohio.
Mr. Speaker, we would reserve.
The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Maryland.
I yield to Mr. Clyburn for 1 minute.
The gentleman from South Carolina, Mr. Clyburn, the majority whip, is recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I rise in support of this resolution. In recent days, it has become indisputable that this president is unable to uphold his oath to preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution. On the contrary, he seems only capable of attacking the Constitution. Never before has the president sought to overturn a fair and secure election, threatening state officials to manufacture fraudulent votes. Never before has the president incited mob violence to block certification of his opponent's victory. Never before has the president refused to condemn and demand the cessation of an attack on our country. The devastating bruises on our nation's soul can only begin to heal by removing the weapon used to bludgeon us. The Vice President must invoke the 25th Amendment to immediately remove power from this dangerous president. And if he doesn't, we must vote to impeach. I'll yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Ohio, Gentleman reserves. Mr. Raskin, you may proceed.
I yield 1 minute to Mr. Krishnamurthy from Illinois.
Gentleman from Illinois is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, I'm so glad our friends have changed their mantra from stop the steal to start to heal. But in order to heal, you have to take strong medicine, and that medicine happens to be the truth. My friends, the truth is, unfortunately, this president is no longer fit to serve. We cannot trust this president to protect American democracy after he encouraged his supporters to, quote unquote, fight like hell in storming the Capitol. We cannot trust him to protect American safety after he told these violent seditionists that, quote, we love you. You're very special, close quote. We cannot trust this president to tell right from wrong, even today, when he said that his remarks on January 6th were, quote unquote, totally appropriate. Mr. Speaker, we cannot trust this president to protect us when he instigated a mob that tried to kill us. I yield back.
Yields back. The gentleman reserves.
Reserve.
Mr. Jordan, you're recognized.
We reserve.
Gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Maryland.
I yield 45 seconds to Mr. Soto from Florida.
Gentleman is recognized for 45
seconds.
45 seconds. The gentleman is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I was in the gallery right behind us when the Capitol was breached. Then domestic terrorists breached the rotunda. I heard the loud sounds of gunshots through this sacred chamber. And my last images were brave Capitol Police, guns drawn to protect us. This was the first armed insurrection in over 200 years. And who incited this violent insurrection? Donald J. Trump. Our resolution states these protests were encouraged by him. He urged millions of his followers to come and stop the steal, which is a lie. And let's say this now for the record and for the ages. Joe Biden won. And for this high crime nearly ripping our country back, we should be removing him by the 25th Amendment, or he should be impeached.
Back from Maryland reserves. The gentleman from Ohio.
I think we'll reserve one.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from Maryland.
I yield to the distinguished Congress lady from California, Ms. Waters.
Gentleman from California, Ms. Waters, the chair of the Committee on Financial Services.
How much time?
How much time?
How much time?
Are you yielding, Mr. Raskin?
1 minute.
Gentleman yields to the gentlelady. 1 minute. Gentlelady is now recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, on January 6, 2021, domestic terrorists the president has empowered for years stormed the Capitol, desecrated the People's House, and threatened the lives of the Speaker, Vice President, and countless other members and staff. None of us will ever forget that day. The invasion of the Capitol was not only foreseeable, it was inevitable because of the many years the president has spent fanning the flames of hatred and racism in our country. The facts are clear. The president rallied his supporters at the White House and then sent them to the Capitol to disrupt our democracy and overturn an election. I won't spend another second explaining why Donald Trump should have long ago been removed from office. Donald Trump showed us who he was from the very beginning. Too many people turned a blind eye. And last Wednesday, our country paid the price. I yield back to balance.
He yields back.
Go. I'm going to go.
How much time do both sides have remaining, please?
The gentleman from Maryland is advised that he has 7 3/4 minutes remaining. The gentleman from Ohio has 8 minutes remaining.
I reserve.
The gentleman reserves.
Mr. Speaker,
gentleman from Ohio.
Mr. Speaker, I yield myself such time as I might use. This past year, government told Americans you can't go to church, you can't go to work, you can't go to school. 1 hour ago, Democrats told Republicans new rules for the House. Today, you can say anything you want about the president. No rule on decorum, no rule about attacking personality. They can say anything they want, and we've seen that they've done that. Today on the floor, got to wear a mask. If your mask comes below your nose, you're going to get fined. And in order to come in here and debate and represent, constitutionally represent your constituents, the 750,000 people we all get the privilege of serving, you had to walk through a metal detector. And they did all those changes with less than 40 minutes of debate. And tomorrow, they're going to impeach a president who is leaving office in 8 days. 8 days before there will be a peaceful transfer of power, just like there has been every other time in American history. But they're going to do impeachment. They're going to do it. again. They've been obsessed with it. It is truly an obsession. People on the Democrat side started calling for impeachment the day President Trump was inaugurated. They attacked him before he even won the first election, before he won in 2016. They attacked him that summer when they started their investigation. This is scary where this goes, because this is more than about impeaching the President of the United States. This is about canceling the President and canceling all the people you guys disagree with. That's what scares me more than anything. We have seen it play out over the past several days. I never thought I'd see the things that we are now witnessing. And I don't know where it ends. But I tell you what, it should scare us all. And I said this in the Judiciary Committee, and the gentleman from Maryland will remember this. The cancel culture doesn't just go after conservatives and Republicans. It won't just stop there. It'll come for us all. That's what's frightening. And I hope you all recognize that. And at some point, we can unite and actually do things that help those folks back home that we all get the privilege of representing. Reserve our time, Mr. Speaker.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from Maryland.
Thank you. The cancel culture of violent white supremacy tried to cancel out all of our lives last Wednesday. I yield 1 minute to Congressman Panetta.
Gentleman from California, Mr.
Speaker, on January 7th at 4 in the morning, I was right outside those doors where 14 hours earlier, a rioter was shot as she violently tried to enter this chamber. It was in that early morning and at that location that I had a brief conversation with Vice President Mike Pence right after we finished certifying the Electoral College. I was proud that we did our job that morning, despite the violence we experienced earlier that day. But I knew that was not enough because of the seditious actions by President Trump before that riot and his inaction during that riot. So I said to the Vice President, it's up to you to keep us safe. Tonight, with the President still in office, I'm beyond asking. I'm legislating to compel the Vice President to convene the Cabinet to conclude that the President is not just unable, but clearly he is unwilling and unworthy to discharge his duties. So through this legislation, I ask my colleagues to call on the Vice President to invoke the 25th Amendment, yes, to keep us safe and keep this nation secure. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman reserves. Yes. Gentleman from Ohio.
Recognize the gentlelady from New Mexico, Ms. Harrell, for 1 minute.
Gentlelady from New Mexico is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise in opposition to the misuse of the 25th Amendment. To preserve separation of powers, the authors of the 25th Amendment correctly intended Section 4 to be initiated by the Vice President, not by the request of Congress. Process concerns aside, the fact is removing the President from office will not heal our nation. It will not bridge our partisan divides, give Americans hope, or bring us together. It will only make things worse. With just days away until President Trump leaves the White House and just days into our new Congress, we have more important things to do. We should be working to hold big tech accountable. We should be working to help families and small businesses get through the pandemic. We should be working on jobs, on infrastructure, on energy, and all the other issues our constituents sent us here to address. I am appalled by the violence that took place here last week. Those who assaulted police officers and forced their way into these hallowed halls are responsible for their criminal acts and must be brought to justice. I cannot support the the 25th Amendment. But I'm also tired of the double standard, the double talk, and the double trouble that we've brought upon the American people, and we have got to stand for our Constitution. This is our Nehemiah moment, and we better take for granted. Thank you. I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from Ohio.
Reserve.
Gentleman reserves. Mr. Raskin.
I yield to Dr. Bera, 45 seconds.
The gentleman is recognized for 45 seconds.
Mr. Speaker, just over a week ago, we all took the oath of office, all of us, Democrats and Republicans, and part of that oath was to support and defend the Constitution against all enemies, both foreign and domestic. It's quite clear what happened last Wednesday, a domestic attack on our government, a domestic attack on this body. Republicans have already acknowledged who instigated the attack. The lead instigator was the President of the United States. Now, it is our solemn duty to uphold that oath, to defend our Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. There is nothing more solemn than what we have to do. If my colleagues don't want to instigate the 25th Amendment, that's one mechanism. We'll give you an opportunity tomorrow to impeach the president. That's our duty. That's what we have to do. Let's uphold our oath. And I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Maryland
Reserves.
The gentleman from Ohio.
We reserve, Mr.
Gentleman
Speaker.
reserves. Gentleman from Maryland.
I yield 45 seconds to Mr. Gomez.
45 seconds is yielded to Mr. Gomez.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We're here tonight because a violent mob incited by the President of the United States, based on a lie, laid siege to Congress to overturn a presidential election. But we have to ask ourselves, what would have happened if that mob succeeded? Why stop at one election? Why not two? Why not make Donald Trump president for life? Thank God that did not happen and they did not succeed. However, even after that terrible day of January 6th, 2021, Donald Trump is still using the lie of a stolen election to turn American against American for his own selfish ends. I believe even with only a few days left in office that Donald Trump is still a danger to our republic and must be removed immediately. And as a fact, and as an example, today the Joint Chiefs of Staff issued a statement support.
Seconds to the gentleman.
Gentleman is granted an additional 10 seconds.
And today the Joint Chiefs of Staff issued a statement reaffirming their devotion to the rule of law and affirming that Joe Biden will be the 46th President of the United States. With that, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Mr. Raskin, you reserve. Gentleman from Ohio.
We reserve.
Gentleman reserves.
I yield 1 minute to Ms. Velasquez from New York.
Gentlelady from New York, the chair of the Committee on Small Business, is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, I rise in strong support of this resolution. Impressionable children are watching all of this, and they are learning from us. I believe we each have a moral obligation to exercise good judgment and model the behavior we hope they will emulate. That was Betsy DeVos. As I am sure is the case with many of you, it has deeply troubled me in a way that I simply cannot set aside. That was Elaine Chao. Mr. Speaker, these were members of the President's own cabinet who bore the sacred responsibility of taking action when the President is clearly unfit for office. But their words are all talk, and if they will not act, then Congress will. So today, we are giving the Vice President 24 hours to do right by the American people. Remove this President from office, and if you do not, the House will impeach. I yield back.
He yields back. The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Ohio.
Reserve.
Gentleman reserves. Back to you, Mr. Raskin.
I yield 1 minute to the distinguished gentleman from California, Mr. Schiff.
The gentleman from California, Mr. Schiff, is recognized for 1 minute.
6 days ago, I was standing right here, fulfilling my constitutional duties to certify the election. And 6 days ago, Donald Trump was on the Mall, whipping a mob into a frenzy with false claims of stolen elections and unconstitutional schemes. It was a big lie, the same big lie he had been telling for weeks. He told the mob, "We are going to the Capitol and to fight like hell," and they did. 5 died. Many more were hurt, and we were seconds away from something much worse. My colleagues, upholding our oath, the Constitution, and our democracy means recognizing that every second that Donald Trump is president, the nation is at risk. We have the power to do something about it. Mike Pence must do his duty, invoke the 25th, and if he won't, we will move with urgency to do ours and impeach Donald Trump again. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Reserves. From Maryland, the gentleman from Maryland is advised that he has 2 3/4 minutes remaining. The gentleman from Ohio is advised that he has 4 3/4 minutes remaining. The gentleman from Ohio.
I yield 3 minutes to the gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Davidson.
The gentleman from Ohio is recognized. 3 minutes.
I thank the gentleman
Mr. Speaker, I can't say it better than the Vice President said it himself. Vice President Mike Pence said, "Last week I did not yield to pressure to exert power beyond my constitutional authority to determine the outcome of the election. And I will not now yield to efforts in the House of Representatives to play political games at a time so serious in the life of our nation." I ask unanimous consent to submit this to the record.
Without objection.
I thank the Vice President for his excellent leadership, for his professionalism, and frankly for his faithfulness to our Constitution. Not only would it be an abuse of the 25th Amendment for Mike Pence to invoke it to make a political statement, it's clearly not our role in Congress to do what we're doing here tonight, or is proposed to do by the majority. Speaker Pelosi claims that President Trump incited the mob that attacked the Capitol at a rally. Well, as Mr. McClintock spoke earlier, he read the President's statement. He encouraged people to come peacefully and patriotically. The Washington Post is reporting something that I would hope that our chairman of the Intel Committee would know about. The FBI report warned of war at the Capitol the day before the attack on our Capitol. I'm curious how someone proposes that the President incited the mob at a rally the day before the rally. I ask unanimous consent the article be submitted to the record.
Without objection.
You know, others are reporting a timeline that has the breach out of sync as well, but that highlights the important. There's far too little that we know about this attack on our Capitol. Here's what we do know. No one has defended this attack on our Capitol. On our contrary, we are missing, willfully missing, in my opinion, a moment of extreme unity in our nation, just like was willfully done earlier this year. At a time of great political and partisan division, even seething anger, one thing all Americans seem to agree on: these attacks were wrong. The President condemned them. He discouraged violence, not just on January 6th, but on other days throughout the year, as he talked about law and order, as he talked about something that we finally seem to agree on, that there is a clear distinction between the Constitution's First Amendment protection of the right to assemble peaceably and riots. Criminal, unlawful riots. There's a distinction between rioters and protesters, and frankly, it took us months to agree on that as a body in Congress, but the people of the United States of America agreed to it. They understood it. So I encourage my colleagues across the political spectrum, the members of Congress here gathered together today and tomorrow, to stand united with the agreement our country has. This was wrong, and it was not.
The gentleman from Ohio.
30. Additional.
Gentleman from Ohio reserves.
Reserve.
Gentleman from Maryland.
3/4 of a minute to Mr. Espaillat from New York.
Gentleman from New York, Mr. Espaillat, is recognized for 45 seconds.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We've all known for a while now, but this past week it has become undeniably clear Donald J. Trump is unfit. To the Secretary of Agriculture, Defense, Commerce, and Education and Transportation, he is unfit. To the Secretaries of Human Services, Homeland Security, Housing, Interior, and Labor, he is unfit. To the Attorney General, he is unfit. To the Vice President of the United States, he summons his goons. They shed their hoods and came with their racist Confederate flag to assassinate him, to assassinate the Vice President. He is unfit. Invoke the 25th Amendment. If not, we will impeach him tomorrow. And I yield back.
Goes back. The gentleman reserves. Gentleman from Ohio reserves. Mr. Raskin.
I'm yielding 45 seconds to Mr. Davis of Illinois.
The gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Danny Davis, recognized for 45 seconds.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. After listening to all that I've heard this evening, I still have the faith and belief that we can come together as a unit. I was reading my Bible the other day and saw that it said, "Come and let us reason together. Otherwise we shall all be destroyed by the edge of the sword." I say to my colleagues, Let's reason together. You cannot erase truth with a lie. You cannot pretend that what has happened did not happen. Yes, we ought to have a president, but it's time for this one to go. I urge passage of this resolution and agree wholeheartedly.
The gentleman yields back. The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Ohio.
We reserve.
He reserves. Mr. Raskin.
I yield 45 seconds to the distinguished gentleman from California, Mr. Thompson.
Mr. Thompson is recognized for 45 seconds.
Mr. Speaker, the President of the United States incited an attack against our democracy. For months, he ginned up his supporters with lies about our election and incited them to violence. On the 6th of January, he unleashed a mob on the Capitol. The President must be held accountable for this vile attack. He knew what he was doing, and now 5 people are dead. Congress will not be intimidated. America will not succumb to mob rule. The Vice President can initiate removal of the President who's unfit for office, and this President is unfit. He must be removed. I urge a yes vote on this resolution, and I urge a yes vote on impeachment tomorrow. And I yield back.
Gentleman yields back.
My time.
The gentleman from Maryland reserves. Do you reserve?
But we have one last speaker. Is the gentleman prepared to close?
I'm prepared to close.
Ohio prepared to close? Ohio is recognized.
I thought you had one last speaker.
But we'll go after you.
Oh, no, I know
we'll
you
We'll close on my speaker.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. What happened at the Capitol on January 6th was as wrong can be. It's not what America's about. And we condemn this violence. We commend the men and women of the Capitol Police for their bravery, and we mourn the loss of those lives that were taken last week. Republicans have been consistent. We condemned the violence last summer. We condemned the violence last week. Democrats have been consistent about one thing: their endless quest to overturn the 2016 election. I mean, they're still trying to overturn the 2016 election after the 2020 election. This has been an obsession with you guys. In the first round, the first impeachment, based on the anonymous whistleblower that the country couldn't, you tried to remove President Trump from office based on a guy that we weren't even allowed to see, know who he or she was, couldn't cross-examine him, anonymous whistleblower with no firsthand knowledge, who was biased against the president and who worked, interestingly enough, for Joe Biden. So continuing this quest is not, as has been said so many times on the floor tonight, not what the country needs. Not what the country needs, particularly after the year the country has lived through. So I hope we will not vote for this, that this thing will go down, and I urge my colleagues to vote against the resolution sponsored by the gentleman from Maryland. With that, we yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Mr. Raskin.
And, Mr. Speaker, I yield the remainder of my time, which I think is 47 seconds, to the distinguished chairman of the Agriculture Committee, Mr. Scott of Georgia.
The gentleman from Georgia is allowed 30 seconds to close.
Well, thank you for that, Mr. Speaker. But what we're discussing tonight, isn't about us. It's about the will of the American people. They're brokenhearted. They're crying. They're discouraged. And the overwhelming number of American people want this president out of office now. This is why we got to do it now. We got to heal the wounds. The longer that president is over there, the more we're tearing the heart and soul out of the American people. Let us do it now.
The gentleman's time has expired. All time for debate has now expired. Pursuant to House Resolution 38, the previous question is ordered on the resolution and on the preamble as amended. The question is on adoption of the resolution. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes have it. The ayes have it. The resolution is agreed to.
Mr. Speaker, I'd ask for a recorded vote.
Pursuant to Section 3 of the House Resolution 8, the yeas and nays are ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device. What purpose does the gentleman from Indiana seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as the member designated by Mr. Baird of Indiana, pursuant to H-Res 8, I inform the House that Mr. Baird will vote no on H-Res 21.
Maryland seeks recognition.
Mr. Speaker, as the member designated by Ms. Alma Adams of North Carolina, pursuant to H-Res 8, I inform the House that Ms. Adams will vote yes on H-Res 21.
Purpose does the gentleman from Virginia seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as the member designated by Mr. Peters, pursuant to H-Res 8, I inform the House that Mr. Peters will vote yes on H-Res 21. As the member designated by Mr. Liu, pursuant to H-Res 8, I inform the House that Mr. Liu will vote yes on H-Res 21. As the member designated by Mr. Lowenthal, pursuant to H-Res 8, I inform the House that Mr. Lowenthal will vote yes on H-Res 21. As the member designated by Mr. Blumenauer, pursuant to H-Res 8, I inform the House that Mr. Blumenauer will vote yes on H-Res 21.
For what purpose does the gentleman from California seek recognition?
As the member designated by Mr. Vela, pursuant to H-Res 8, I inform the House that Mr. Vela will vote aye on H-Res 21.
For what purpose does the gentleman from California seek recognition?
As a member designated by Ms. Eshoo, pursuant to H-Res 8, I inform the House that Ms. Eshoo will vote yes on H-Res 21.
For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Virginia seek recognition?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As the member designated by Mr. McEachin pursuant to H-Res 8, I inform the House that Mr. McEachin will vote yes on H-Res 21. And as the member designated by Ms. Porter pursuant to H-Res 8, I inform the House that Ms. Porter will vote yes on H-Res 21.
For what purpose does the gentleman from New York seek recognition?
As the member designated by Chairwoman Eddie Bernice Johnson pursuant to H-Res 8, I inform the House that Chairwoman Johnson will vote yea on H-Res 21. As the member designated by Chairman Jerry Nadler pursuant to H-Res 8, I inform the House that Chairman Nadler will vote yea on H-Res 21. As the member designated by Congressman Brendan Boyle pursuant to H-Res 8, I inform the House that Congressman Boyle will vote yea on H-Res 21.
Purpose does the gentleman from Michigan seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as the member designated by Mr. Bergman pursuant to House Resolution 8, I inform the House that Mr. Bergman will vote no on H-Res 21. Mr. Speaker, as a member designated by Mr. Lamborn pursuant to House Resolution 8, I inform the House that Mr. Lamborn will vote no on H-Res 21.
For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Maine seek recognition?
As a member designated by Ms. Custer, pursuant to H-Res 8, I inform the House that Ms. Custer will vote yea on H-Res 21.
Gentleman from North Carolina seek recognition.
Mr. Speaker, as a member designated by Mr. Bishop of Georgia, pursuant to H-Res 8, I inform the House that Mr. Bishop will vote yes. He will vote yes on H-Res 21. Mr. Speaker, as a member designated by Mr. Thompson of Mississippi, pursuant to H-Res 8, I inform the House that Mr. Thompson will vote yes on H-Res 21. Finally, Mr. Speaker, as a member designated by Mr. Richmond of Louisiana, pursuant to H-Res 8, I inform the House that Mr. Richmond will vote yes on H-Res 21.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Massachusetts seek recognition?
As the member designated by Ms. Frankel pursuant to H-Res 8, I inform the House that Ms. Frankel will vote yes on H-Res 21. As the member designated by Ms. Bonamici pursuant to H-Res 8, I inform the House that Ms. Bonamici will vote yes on H-Res 21.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Texas seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as the member designated by, let's see, who am I? pursuant to HRes 8, I inform the House that Ms. Fletcher will vote aye on HRes 21.
Illinois. Ready? For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Illinois seek recognition?
As the member designated by Mr. Carson pursuant to HRes 8, I inform the House that Mr. Carson will vote yes on HRes 21. As the member designated by Mr. Rush pursuant to HRes 8, I inform the House that Mr. Rush will vote yes on HRes 21.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Maryland seek recognition?
As the member designated by Ms. Jayapal pursuant to House Resolution 8, I inform the House Ms. Jayapal will vote aye on House Resolution 21.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Illinois seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as the member designated by Mr. Grijalva pursuant to HRes 8, I inform the House that Mr. Grijalva will vote yes on HRes 21, and as the member designated by Ms. Presley pursuant to HRes 1, I inform the House that Ms. Presley will vote yes on HRes 21.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Tennessee seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as the member designated by Mr. Fleischman of Tennessee pursuant to HRes 8, I inform the House that Mr. Fleischman will vote nay on HRes 21. As the member designated by Mr. Desjardins of Tennessee pursuant to HRes 8, I inform the House that Mr. Desjardins will vote nay on HRes 21.
For what purpose does the gentleman from New Jersey seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as the member designated by Ms. Bonnie Watson Coleman pursuant to HRes 8, I inform the House that Ms. Watson Coleman will vote yes on HRes 21. And as the member designated by Mr. Albio Series pursuant to HRes 8, I inform the House that Mr. Series will vote yes on HRes 21. And as the member designated by Mr. Bill Pascrell pursuant to HRes 8, I inform the House that Mr. Pascrell will vote yes on HRes 21. And finally, Mr. Speaker, as the member designated by Mr. Paul Tonko pursuant to HRes 8, I inform the House that Mr. Tonko will vote yes on HRes 21. Thank you.
Purpose does the gentleman from Kansas seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as the member designated by Mr. LaTurner of Kansas pursuant to House Resolution 8, I inform the House that Mr. LaTurner will vote nay on House Resolution 21.
Purpose does the gentleman from Washington seek recognition?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As the member designated by Ms. Strickland of Washington pursuant to HRes 8, I inform the House that Ms. Strickland will vote yes on HRes 21.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Ohio seek recognition?
As the member designated by Mr. Gonzalez of Ohio, pursuant to House Resolution 8, I inform the House that Mr. Gonzalez of Ohio will vote no on HRes 21.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Pennsylvania seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as the member designated by Mr. Lawson of Florida, 5th Congressional District, pursuant to House Resolution 8, I inform the House that Mr. Lawson will vote yea on H Resolution 21.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Connecticut seek recognition?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, as the member designated by Mr. Adam Smith of Washington State pursuant to H-Res 8, I inform the House that Mr. Smith will vote yes on H-Res 21.
For what purpose does the gentleman from California seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as member designated by Congressmember Napolitano, pursuant to House Resolution 8, I inform the House that Congressmember Napolitano will vote yes on H-Res 21. And Mr. Speaker, as member designated by Congressmember Costa, pursuant to House Resolution 8, I inform the House that Congressmember Costa will also vote yes on H-Res 21.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Nebraska seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as a member designated by Mr. Bill Rackus of Florida, pursuant to H-Res 8, I inform the House that Mr. Bill Rackus will vote nay on H-Res 21.
For what purpose does the gentlewoman from California seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as the member designated by Mr. Mondaire Jones of New York, pursuant to H-Res 8, I inform the House that Mr. Jones will vote yea on H-Res 21.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Pennsylvania seek recognition?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As a member designated by Mr. Doyle of Pennsylvania, pursuant to House Resolution 8, I hereby inform the House that Mr. Doyle will vote yes on House Resolution 21.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Arizona seek recognition?
As a member designated by Representative Kirkpatrick, pursuant to H.R. 8, I inform the House that Representative Kirkpatrick will vote aye on H.R. 21. As the member designated by Representative Cardenas, pursuant to H.R. 8, I inform the House that Representative Cardenas will vote aye on H.R. 21.
For what purpose does the gentleman from New Jersey seek recognition?
As the member designated by Mr. Schneider pursuant to H.Res. 8, I inform the House that Mr. Schneider will vote yes on H.Res. 21.
For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Pennsylvania seek recognition?
As the member designated by Ms. Wild, pursuant to H.Res. 8, I inform the House that Ms. Wild will vote yes on H.Res. 21.
For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Connecticut seek recognition?
As the member designated by Ms. Wilson pursuant to H.Res. 8, I inform the House that Ms. Wilson will vote yes on H.Res. 21.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Massachusetts seek recognition?
Good evening, Mr. Speaker. As the member designated by the Honorable Mr. James Langevin of Rhode Island, pursuant to House Resolution 8, I'd like to inform the House that Mr. Langevin will vote yes on House Resolution 21 as amended, a resolution calling on Vice President Michael R. Pence to convene and mobilize the principal office of the Executive Department of the Cabinet to activate Section 4 of the 25th Amendment and to declare President Donald J. Trump incapable of executing the duties of his office and to immediately exercise powers as acting president. Thank you.
For what purpose does the gentleman from California seek recognition?
As the member designated by Congressman Jerry McNerney pursuant to H.Res. 8, I inform the House that Mr. McNerney will vote yes on H.Res. 21.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Virginia seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as the member designated by Ms. Titus of Nevada, pursuant to H.Res. 8, I inform the House that Ms. Titus will vote yes on H.Res. 21.
Purpose does the gentlewoman from New York seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as the member designated by Mr. Young of Alaska pursuant to House Resolution 8, I inform the House that Mr. Young will vote nay on adoption of House Resolution 21. Thank you.
For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Kansas seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as the member designated by Ms. Lager-Fernandez pursuant to H-Res 8, I inform the House that Ms. Lager-Fernandez will vote aye on H-Res 21.
Purpose does the gentleman from Indiana seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as the member designated by Ms. Walorski pursuant to H-Res 8, I inform the House that Ms. Walorski will vote nay on H-Res 21.
For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Michigan seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as the member designated by Mrs. Dingle pursuant to H-Res 8, I will inform the House that Mrs. Dingle will vote yea on H-Res 21. As the member designated by Ms. Lee of Nevada pursuant to H-Res 8, I will inform the House that Ms. Lee will vote yea on H-Res 21. As the member designated by Ms. Capter pursuant to H-Res 8, I inform the House that Ms. Capter will vote yea on H-Res 21. As the member designated by Ms. Axney pursuant to H-Res 8, I inform the House that Ms. Axney will vote yea on H-Res 21.
For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Florida seek recognition?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As a member designated by Mr. Buchanan of the state of Florida pursuant to H-Res 8, I inform the House that Mr. Buchanan will vote nay on H-Res 21.
For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Florida seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as a member designated by Mr. Hastings of Florida pursuant to H-Res 8, I inform the House that Mr. Hastings will vote yea on H-Res 21. And Mr. Speaker, as the member designated by Mr. Payne of New Jersey pursuant to H-Res 8, I inform the House that Mr. Payne will also vote yea on H-Res 21.
For what purpose does the gentlewoman from New York seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as the member designated by Mr. Deutsch of Florida, pursuant to H-Res 8, I inform the House that Mr. Deutsch will vote yes on H-Res 21.
Purpose does the gentlewoman from Michigan seek recognition?
As the member designated by Ms. Ocasio-Cortez pursuant to H-Res 8, I will inform the House that Ms. Ocasio-Cortez will vote yes on H-Res 21.
For what purpose does the gentlewoman from California seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as a member designated by Mr. DeSaulnier pursuant to H-Res 8, I inform the House that Mr. DeSaulnier will vote yes on H-Res 21.
On this vote, the yeas are 223, the nays are 205. The resolution is adopted. Without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. Pursuant to Section 5A1B of House Resolution 8, the House stands adjourned until 9 a.m. tomorrow.